Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. Now, this one is the next part of the raid guide series, so I'm going to cover the Ragnarok Plus fights. They are also called Guardian Plus. This is high level content, so do not even think about going into it with a serious mindset until you have basically have your grids really prepared. That means you have to have nothing short of either ultimate raid weapons, because those can still work, guardian raid weapons, or any like gotcha weapons that you've raised. You need to be pretty powerful for this. A good training point to know if you're ready for this stuff is if a team that you have can clear heroic, because that means you can contribute pretty well to the raid, possibly even MVP it. So that's something to know. Also, keep this one thing in mind, that this video, at the time of this recording, it's before some of these changes will set up and happen, and I'll make sure I'll mention what they are as we go along. So there are some things that are completely different with the fights, and that would happen to be the nerfs that happen in the future. And then there's also some extra stuff you can get. That will be in the pinned comment, so I'll mention that. But the main reason why you're doing these raids is for two things. One, there's a Globe Plus material that comes from each of these raids, and they are used for a lot of very good stuff. And the second thing, you will need these Globe Plus raid materials for entry into the malicious raids, which are going to become the strongest raids on global side. JP sad's already got all the malicious stuff, but the main reason why you do that is for those plus globes. That will get you access to a lot of different stuff, including one of the things I mentioned in the pinned comment. You can still get it that way too. But examples of what they give you is like ability to final limit break at Dolans, which are pretty powerful when they're final limit break. A lot of them get like massive base stat increases and some very strong effects even in sub slots, so that's a very good reason to sip and get that. You can final limit break the guardian weapons. The stat increase isn't that great, but they do still get skill level 30, so that's still making them more powerful. And then there's the Adolans from the Battlefield with Soldiers, I do believe. That is, you cannot get them from SR to SSR without doing these Guardian raids. It is not possible without doing these raids. So that's another incentive to do that, because when you get them to SSR, it makes them their most powerful, and on top of that, it also gives them scenes. So that's more magic jewels on top of it. It like completely changes how the machine beast Adolans are. But anyways, let's get into this these raids. And also, before I even start, I should mention that these raids have a total of roughly 600 million HP. Now, it might be more or less depending on the raids. I'm not exactly sure, but it's still a lot of HP. If you're attending to solo these raids, be prepared for a long fight. So keep that in mind. Unless you have some insane damage output, you're going to be here for a while. Now, starting off, the first one is the Fire Guardian Phaleg, or that's hard to pronounce her name sometimes, but we call her Foul for short. And she's got an assistant, one assistant, because each of these fights will have one or two assistants, just like the Ragnarok catastrophes. In Phaleg's case, she has a lion in a butler suit helping her out. We literally do call him Lion Butler. And the gimmick for this fight is simply trying to alternate your damage between the two until you're ready to kill both of them. And you do have to kill them both at the same time, or the surviving one's going to very they're going to retaliate and start doing a crap ton of damage. So be very, very careful of that. Now, if you remember the previous fight, there's chances where Phallic was able to put stuff like dizzy or confusion on you and all that. That still applies. Just be very, very careful of that, because it's still, it definitely affects the fight itself. Because there's some things she'll do if you're under dizzy status and so on. But in order to really go over all this type of stuff, there's a lot of different triggers where she'll try to put dizzy or confusion on you. And when she goes into burst, she can still do that. So you're going to want to have damage. You're going to want to have the damage protection if you can't have any like cleanse or something like that. So that's something to know. And then on top of that too is the fact that you want to remove her buffs and whatnot as well if you can, because she will be buffing the attack power of herself and her guardian. So, well, assistant, I should say. So that's something you really, really need to pay attention to. Be very, very careful of debuffs landing on you and buffs landing on her. It could really make the fight a lot worse. Now, the other thing I should mention is the fact that if you are not using water attribute in this raid, then you are going to have massively reduced damage and good luck landing any debuffs. You can indeed land elemental debuffs, but only if you're using fire characters. I mean, only if you're using water characters. If you're using something like fire or wind or any other element, you're not landing anything. So use water characters to land your debuffs, basically lowering her fire attack primarily and water resistance, because currently right now we cannot debuff attack and defense on any of these Guardian Plus raids. That will be possible later on, but they'll be reduced effects, so elemental debuffs are still the way to go. And something that I suggest you actually have on standby too, especially since they're not doing orb shop, get some Kaisers, because they can help you out with this. Sorry, I was sneezing. But thing with the Kaisers is that they give you some elemental resistance, which greatly helps for these fights. And it is at least 30%, but can go up to 50% based on the limit breaks, and that's for 2 turns. So definitely get some Kaisers. It's up to you if you want to combine them or keep them separate, but me personally, either way works. But as for dealing with the fight itself, the general thing, you start off with getting the Butler down to 40% of their HP left. Then you get Phallic down to her 40% of her HP left. And then you try to kill both of them at the same time. That's how this fight's going to go. Now, if you have not met the conditions, the one that you're not supposed to take down is going to have massive damage reduction to where it's just pointless to even try to attack them. So keep that in mind. And then on top of that too, be very careful of a nuke that can do like quite a bit of damage as well if one of them survives. So be very, very careful of that. You need to try to kill them both at the same time when you get into the final phase of the fight. So when both of them are at 40% of their HP, start paying attention to the HP bars, attack whoever has more HP so you can try to lower that, and then try to kill them both at the same time. Remember that. Also, this is an error right here on this, because I don't know why they have that. It's a typo. No, Ophiel does not have 100 trillion HP, but it would be interesting if that was the case. Now, Ophiel Plus, she has 2 helpers. And the big thing about this fight too is the fact that you're still going to get hammered with a lot of you're going to get hammered with a lot of damage and debuffs and whatnot, so be very, very careful of that. She hates you doing bursts, so having builds for normal attacks is really going to help you out for this fight, or ability damage. Especially if you have Paracelsus, because she can use spread. But Ophio's going to try and reduce your burst gauges and all that too, so be very, very careful with that part of the fight. Now, the general thing is to try and kill the helpers before you get to Ophio herself. But as far as I can tell, there's nothing stopping you from killing all of them at once, or even killing Ophio first and then the helpers. But you generally want to go after the helpers. Now, me personally, I haven't done this that much at the time of this video in order to really say which helper you should go after first. But generally, you do want to try and take out one before the other, so that way you will start taking less damage. Now, they will sit up and have a retaliation when one of them dies, so remember that. But generally, just be prepared for that, and you're good to go. But same general stuff applies as phallic fights. You want to have reduction against water damage. You want to have elemental debuffs. You want to have pretty much debuff protection or removal. You want to be able to remove buffs, all that type of stuff. Especially since they love doing normal attacks in this fight too. So generally, if you can land, I do believe blind can stick. So if you can land blind or break out some evasion, that can help you out too. Reducing their combo rate with some buffs is helpful as well, so that's something to know. So that's something to really pay attention to, but my suggestion, you kill the helpers first, then you go after the main boss. So that's something to know. Now, Bether, her Ragnarok Plus version of the fight, the general gimmick for her fight, she does put a crap ton of debuffs on you throughout the entire fight, like damage over time and all that. And the biggest thing is the fact that Bether herself cannot be damaged at all. You're supposed to kill her helpers, and then she just gives up on the fight. That's how you really do this. Now, like the previous Guardian in Rage, you need to be elemental advantage, of course, in order to do anything. Killing both the helpers at once is recommended, but you do want to try to kill the helpers and just not waste anything on Bether. If you have anything that does random multiple hits, like I know Ares has a multiple hit ability, then any hits that Bether takes is just going to absorb. It's just going to be wasted effort, basically. It's just not going to work. But when the helpers die, Bether's supposed to sit and basically self-destruct. The interesting thing is that even though you can't damage her, she still has like 10 million HP. I don't know why they gave her that much, really, when it doesn't matter. But it is what it is. But her attack pattern is actually the same as her original Guardian raid, so generally you want to just be protected against a lot of different debuffs and whatnot. And be careful of random paralysis too, because that can really mess you up a little bit. But if you are going to take some helpers for this fight, you definitely want to try and get your hands on a few Kamihime that's got some like buff protection, like debuff protection. One of them's limited and has it against 2 stacks of debuffs, I remember. And she also doubles as a healer, so that's something to know. But again, just protect yourself against debuffs. That's a big thing. That's a very, very big thing, because the more debuffs you have on you too, the more damage you start taking. So pay close attention to that. And then also on top of that too, there is a bit of retaliation if one helper dies and the other doesn't. And it's a pretty big retaliation as well. as it's going to permanently spike their damage output, so be careful of that. You need to kill both of them at the same time to have the easiest fight for this, so pay close attention. And don't waste anything on Bether, it's not worth it. Now, as for Full, there's a big thing with her fight that you really need to pay attention to. She does a lot of static damage, like fixed damage. You will start taking a lot of it in this fight. That said, damage cut is not going to help you against that fixed damage. What's really going to help you is defense. Defense helps a lot in this fight because of the fixed damage, because for some weird reason defense still works. So if you can get as much defense as possible, I know when I did this fight, my win team wasn't that strong, but I did manage to have 2 sets of stackable defense thanks to Rom's EX skill, which is still helpful. And when Uriel, that's another good one that I can probably use in this fight, and I suggest others do too. Of course, anybody that really has some like good protection against it. Interestingly enough, though, I think elemental resistance still helps you out quite a bit on this fight too. So Gaia can actually still help you either way because she can still absorb attacks when they're like single target. So if you want to have somebody take all the damage, you can still use Gaia to like redirect that. But there's still the paralysis from her Guardian version. Still basically up to her damage output. You do want to kill the helper first and then deal with Full herself. So that's the main thing with that. And then when you start taking down Full's HP, she starts strengthening herself throughout the fight, so be very, very careful of that. But this is the one time where defense is actually more helpful than damage cut, so keep that in mind. So defense stacking is really, really good for that. If you happen to have Rom or even Joan, because she still got access to that stackable defense, but if you have Rom and then Wind or Oriole, they stack a lot of AoE defense, so that can really get you some good protection. I managed to survive this fight with the help of some healers too, and that managed to get me like through this fight with basically 15,000 HP. So that's just how good that is if you can do it correctly. I mean, I still would need more HP than 15,000, but you get what I mean. Now then, Hagif, the interesting thing with her fight, you still want to kill the helpers first. But one helper is resistant against burst damage, and one helper is resistant against normal attack damage. And then the big thing too is that at one point, you will have to give her enough damage to prevent her from using a strong attack against you, which generally takes 10 million damage dealt in order to prevent that. So if you don't do that 10 million in like 3 turns, she'll sit up and retaliate with something very, very painful. It's not that hard to deal 10 million damage, honestly. So keep that in mind. But kill the helpers first, of course. If you can kill them at the same time, you're more than likely going to be doing it with ability damage, because that's the one thing they don't resist. So Medea users might actually have it pretty good, especially since 1, Medea comes with elemental debuffs, which is already great for this, and 2, a lot of her abilities can go AoE. So that's something to know. But ability damage is unaffected, and then on top of that too, Hagif is protected against damage until her helper dies. So you don't kill the helpers, you're not damaging her that much no matter what you use. So kill the helpers first, you have to. But the big thing is to try and kill one helper, which is the first one, with normal attack damage or ability damage, and kill the second helper with burst damage or ability damage. So ability damage is probably the best way to go for this, if you can get some AoE ability damage going. but you do want to try and make sure you're not using the wrong type of damage against the helpers. And then the biggest thing too is that if you happen to have the SSR version of Nyarlathotep, or it's hard to pronounce her name, that greatly helps this fight. It massively helps this fight. Because that wound debuff really spikes your damage output. It is one of the best things to sip and have in a game. So, and then she also comes with elemental debuffs anyway. So, having her is going to greatly help this fight. So, she is also limited. If you don't have her, there you go. But if you really are struggling with dealing with the helpers, go AoE with ability damage or something like that. That really helps out. There is no point in using spread with Paracelsus in this because of the fact that you will have two enemies that reduce normal attack damage at the start of the fight. So the spread is useless. Follow-up still helps for one of them though if you want to go that route. And then keep in mind that there's still one that's resistant towards burst, so Yori's kind of countered a little bit too. Yori can still normal attack buff, but she's still countered with the burst damage towards one of them. Ability damage is probably the way to go. Now, when it comes to Auratron, the big thing with her fight is that starting off with the helper, it will try to put attack down on you in order to slow down the fight. But then when Auratron's on her own, she starts trying to instantly kill you outright. Be very, very careful with that. Now, I personally sold this fight. If you want to see it, just look up the video for that one. But, generally she's got the same behavior as her Guardian Raid, only it's turn-based now, instead of buff-based. So, the big thing about it is the fact that when she does her first turn, and this is before the helper dies, keep that in mind. But before the helper dies, when she does her first turn, it's just normal attack damage. Second turn, she's forcing a double attack and removes the 30 burst gauge off of somebody. When she's got 2 orbs, it's triple attack and paralysis. And then when she's got max orbs, that's when she'll start doing like a triple nuke randomly. Now, as for the helper, you do have to be careful about a really, really strong attack that it will try and do to you if you do not deal 15 million damage before its count gets to 0. It's very easy to sip and hit that damage if you're bursting, because bursting can sip and still get to 17 million before the soft caps even come into play. But you can't get the count to increase above 5. Whenever you do that 15 million damage, the count will go up by 3. If the count hits 0, it's going to nuke you pretty hard. Be careful of that. So that's something to know. But if you can deal 15 million damage to the helper, then it will increase its count by 3. So every 15 million you deal to it just delays that. So keep that in mind. But then things get tricky when the helper dies, because then Auratron's pattern will sip and change to where if she's got 1 orb, it's going to do a very large damage hit and put targeting on that same character. This will generally take out about half your HP if you're like me and sitting around 30,000. If you have like no protection and you take that hit, you're getting hit for like 15,000. So it can easily get somebody to half HP. The reason this is a problem is because when her orbs is at 0 or 2, you will be given an instant kill debuff. We all know it as Ruin or Doom or however you want to call it. You will be given that instant kill debuff. Be very, very careful of that, because if the character's HP is half or below, they're at risk of getting hit with that debuff, and you only got 1 turn to remove it. So if you don't remove it the next turn, you're going to see your character start dying off very, very easily. And this is up until she has like basically 15% of her HP left, because at the last 15%, she's going to do a lot of AoE damage, and then on top of that, put an unblockable Ruin on everybody. That means you will have to end the fight in 6 turns after that point, or you will see your team get wiped. So that's the main gimmick with this fight. You have to kill the helper while dealing a lot of damage to it in time. Then you gotta try and whittle down Auratron while your health getting below half. Then you gotta end the fight in 6 turns when she's at the final stage. So hopefully you followed all of that. But that's generally how the fight is. But once the helper dies, you are at risk of getting your party pretty much wiped out before their HP even hits 0. So pay attention. But that's the general way of setting up taking on this fight. And I've personally soloed this fight, so now I don't know if you could solo it with a free-to-play grid, but it will be available to do that later on when we get access to stronger stuff, so keep that in mind. In fact, you should be able to solo all of these with a free-to-play grid later on when we get the stronger raids, like the malicious raids and possibly even the new ones they announced for JP, thanks to the new summit. But that's the general thing about this. You're basically doing these sort of Guardian plus globes, and then, like I said, general strategy for these fights is to bring elemental debuffs, and then of course do the usual stuff like protecting yourself against debuffs, and then trying to make sure they're not buffed up so they're starting to do more damage. You do have to pay more attention to these fights. Now, you can still auto battle these fights, but it's my personal suggestion, turn off the auto battle if you're trying to take this seriously, because you do have to change targets and all sorts of stuff like that. So keep that in mind. If you are going to auto battle, make sure you're well prepared for that. It's not like you can't do it, but my recommendation is that you don't. But when it comes to a lot of these fights, you have to really pay attention to what's going on if you truly want to survive. So that said, prepare yourself accordingly. When the nerf hits these raids, there are 2 key factors that change. First and foremost, you will have a limit on elixirs that you can use until that nerf hits. If you're playing this now on the global versions, where we don't have the nerf at the time of this video, you only get 1 elixir before you can't revive. So if you happen to be one of those people that relied on elixirs to survive raids, get that mindset out of here already, because Atlas should have already taught you not to be elixir reliant if you've been doing that. This is also the same case. However, the nerf will sit up and allow unlimited elixir use then. But the bigger part of the nerf, again, you'll be able to use attack and defense debuffs, but they'll be at half effect. So what that means is 30% attack down will be at 15% in these fights. So when that nerf happens, that's how it will be. But the big thing is that they do also say that the defense value is changed when that nerf hits. I don't know if that's true or not, but that will mean that they're taking more damage. So keep that in mind. We've already had a nerf where the trigger for every 20 turns is removed. That was a very dangerous part that made Fowleg and Ophiel much more dangerous, because it's like a super nuke where it will like kill off somebody outright every 20 turns, and then make the bosses stronger with a permanent buff. That's already happened, and I didn't want to cover the video then because it was something that was going to be quickly changed anyway. I wanted to cover this when we got all 6 fights. So remember, we don't have the attack defense nerf, but when that happens, you'll be able to use those. Until then, well, even if that nerf hits, stick to elemental debuffs because they're the most potent. And then, again, big thing, this is the point of the game where you're expected to use elemental advantage. Do not even think about going into these fights without elemental advantage. It's just not going to work. But anyways, that's all for this. Sorry I didn't go into full detail on all their different data, otherwise we'd be here for like maybe 3-4 times longer. That is a lot of info to go over, because as you can see, there's a lot of different things that happen. But if you know how to fight the Guardian fights, you generally got the idea for the Guardian Plus ones. You just need to know who to target and what new stuff to look out for. And again, 600 million HP, guys. We're starting to hit very, very high HP amounts. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon because, of course, when malicious ones are out, I'll do videos on that. And then, of course, JP has announced even harder raids than malicious, so oh boy. But anyways, that's all for this. More will come soon, and take care.